Welcome to an introduction to digital humanities. First, a little bit about us. Al Valentin is an academic and artist. While trained in gender studies, their work focuses on media, technology, and science. In their postdoctoral research, they help to develop curriculum for a digital humanities minor.
Caroline Wilkinson is an associate professor of English. She researches assessment strategies and composition and collaborates on a potential digital humanities minor.
Jennifer Musial is an associate professor in the Department of Gender, Africana, and Latin American Studies. She is working on two digital humanities projects through Omeka, a memorial site for victims of fatal violence against pregnant people, and an LGBTQ oral history archive.
So, what are the humanities? For us, we're defining them as areas of study that enable us to consider what it is to be human, what that means for individuals, and on a societal scale. And so, things like history, performing arts, media studies, religion, right? All of these areas really enable us to have more context and understanding of how people live, what people value, the decisions that people make in ways that are really useful for our students. Even though they're framed as sort of soft areas in opposition to these hard sciences, which are seen as more objective, there's still so much value for our students to have a real strong basis in the humanities that goes to everything from critical thinking skills to enabling their creativity, giving them the context to understand the present moment, which is so key right now, and just giving us a fuller, more broad scope of what it means to be human that exists without the sort of narrow confines of their city or state or country. When we say digital, we're thinking about electronic technology that generates, stores, and processes data in terms of those binary states. So 0, 1, false or closed, off or open, true, on. Binary code is the foundation of all electronic technology. For digital humanities, we're often thinking about things like websites, the internet, social media, audiobooks, games, right? All of these sorts of things. But I just want to emphasize, right, that there's not really any part of our lives as humans that doesn't have some sort of digital platform or digital technology tied to it, whether it's the way that banking works today, whether it's calling an Uber or even using Blackboard with your students, right? It's such an ever present part of our life that it's really key for students to have literacy around digital technology. So then what is digital humanities when you put it all together? We're thinking about using digital technology to study and research humanities, right? So how those tools can have us have bigger data sets, better answers, new tools to work with, as well as ensuring that we're using humanities lenses to reframe technology, to put it in a better societal and ethical context, right? So when we're thinking about something like AI, it's not just about how AI can help us do better humanities work, but how these humanities lenses can ensure that we're making the best choices that we can in terms of ethics and so on and so forth, right? Some of the real key things that we get from something like digital humanities is more access, right? So freer access to knowledge because we can disseminate it in new ways, a bigger scope. We're able to do projects that before would have been impossible due to the complexity of the materials or the size of the sources, and interactivity, right? It really engages students with hands-on learning and teaches them new skills that are valuable in our marketplace. There's so many different types of projects that we can't really get into the wide scope of them. If you want to pause this and really look through, that'd be great. But whether it's thinking about archives, making video games, something that I did with some of the students at your school last semester, or doing data visualization, right? These are all different types of DH projects that are really valuable for students, and we're going to show you a couple ones that we do in our own work today.
My name is Jennifer Musial, and I'm excited to tell you about a digital humanities tool that I use called Omeka. Now, Omeka is a content management system that was developed in 2007 by a team at George Mason University. At the time, there was a need to make public history more accessible, more available to the public through a digital means. Omeka was created as this opportunity, and it allows users to build sites without needing any programming language, which makes it very accessible. Now, if you have programming language, you can add plugins onto Omeka and you can go as wild as you like, but it's not necessary to create a really great, engaging Omeka site. Okay, now Omeka has three platforms. There's Omeka Classic, Omeka Omeka.net and Omeka S. So I want to just briefly tell you about each so you can decide which might be the right one for you. Omeka Classic is an open source, customizable platform, but requires downloading the software. Omeka.net is a also open source, freely available site, but it runs on Omeka's servers, which means that I go to the website, I go through my web browser, I log in, I do what I need to do, I log out, it's saved to the Omeka servers. Omeka S is designed for institutions, and that might be something like a university library that subscribes to the service, where then faculty, students, staff, and community members can subscribe to the site. Now, Omeka is designed to feel very much like a digital art gallery or museum. So it uses terms like collections and exhibits that kind of describe the content that users can create. Every item, and that's what Omeka calls everything that you put into a system, it's an item. So it could be an audio clip, a video, a scan of a newspaper, or a photograph. Users can then group those items, if they wish, into something like a collection or an exhibit, very much like a museum creates or curates, rather, a thematic display from its archives or repository. The platform was developed by people in the humanities from art history and history specifically, but it can be useful for anybody in the social sciences. And I'm confident that even if you're in STEM, you can come up with some really interesting and creative ways to use Omeka. Now I'm going to show you my Omeka site, which is currently very basic, but I have plans to build it out in the future. I'm also going to show you another Omeka site that uses a lot more visual material as a way to draw you in, just to give you a contrast of what it might look like between different forms of Omeka use.
Now, this is a site that's in development. There's nothing on this site just yet. I won't even tell you what the site's about because it's all in development. But what I wanted to tell you about this is the tabs that you can see. These are the default tabs. This is the default language of Omeka. An about page, a browse items page, browse collections, and contact us. That's immediately what Omeka gives you. You can change the names of those tabs and you can build it out, but that's what a basic site looks like. All right, now let me show you something that I have customized, which is an oral history website.
Welcome to the digital home of the Hudson County LGBTQ Oral History Archive that I've created. The front page is text. There'll be more bells and whistles added to that later on, and I'll show you a little bit about what somebody could find on this page. Students in my LGBTQ social change class have been conducting interviews with members of the Hudson County LGBTQ community for quite a few years now. Now, Omeka allowed us the ability to preserve and present their stories. At the top of this page, you'll see the ability to browse narrators. Now, I have changed that language from browse items to browse narrators because it made more sense for our project. When you click on that, now you come to a page that has narrators that you can click on to see more of their story. So I'm going to give you an example by clicking on Dr. Dela Cruz. When I click on this narrator, it brings up her profile, which includes a description of what is talked about in the interview, her photo, and the ability to listen by clicking play on that slider there to the interview, as well as read or listen to or read the transcript along with the interview. This is just the beginning. I plan to use this archive and grow it in a bunch of different kinds of ways. Future enhancements that I would like to do would be create themed exhibits with students where we could pull together relevant narrators, such as building a collection on the history of Jersey City's Pride Festival. And maybe we add YouTube clips to that of various video from previous Pride festivals. We look into the newspaper archives to see how it was talked about. We add photos that go back now, over 25 years to various Pride festivals of the past. That would really bring that to life. So I want to incorporate things like newspaper clippings and maps and other kinds of media to enhance the context and storytelling. My goal is to bring these oral histories to life in an engaging way, a multimedia, interactive digital format.
This Omeka site showcases the performative arts, community traditions, and cultural heritage of New Orleans. The entry point for the site is this big, beautiful mural with these interactive green dots that visitors can click on to access related multimedia content. So, for example, if I click on this top dot, I can learn more about New Orleans fashion as communicated to me through this YouTube video. So this site curates a lot of what is already available on the web and in other places and brings it together under the thematic focus of New Orleans culture, tradition, etc. Beyond the video interactives, the site also features collections, exhibits, and individual items that dive deeper into this particular topic or theme. So you can see the traditional language at the top of exhibits, collections, and items. This is how this Omeka page is organized. One of the featured exhibits explores the influence of Latin America and the Caribbean on NOLA culture. Clicking on this exhibit reveals this interactive map that allows users to navigate to different areas and uncover related multimedia assets. Now you'll notice that this map was created using StoryMap.js, which it can be integrated into Omeka through a plugin. Overall, the Omeka platform allows users to engage with the story of New Orleans through this highly visual, interactive, and multimedia-driven experience. So by layering types of content on and enabling this seamless navigation between them, the site paints a compelling portrait of the city's vibrant cultural identity.
While I've shown you how Omeka can be very helpful for public history kinds of projects, the platform has other applications to additional disciplines. For example, English professors and language arts teachers can use Omeka to demonstrate literary connections. Imagine finding primary sources, such as archives with diary scans or letters written between literary icons, as a neat way to talk about how deeply writers think about their craft in conversation with others. Omeka's capabilities can extend to legal analysis and legislative analysis, where users can create an interactive timeline using the plugin Timeline.js to trace the life cycle of bills and laws. So you can create a timeline and then have various kinds of pop-outs where that allows you to learn a little bit more about the life cycle of legislation with relevant information. Overall, I find Omeka to be exciting, very user-friendly, with applications far beyond public history. And I hope some of you will be intrigued as well to play around with Omeka too. If you get stuck, there are so many YouTube tutorials on Omeka, as well as a very responsive Omeka help desk that can assist you.
So now I'm going to talk a little bit about doing network analysis projects with my students. I used Flourish, which is a browser-based and open source tool that allows you to make tons of different beautiful data visualizations. A network is essentially an interconnected system that has nodes and links, right? And whether we're thinking about it in the context of social networks, a power grid, a neural network, right? Mapping those, these are such an important part of how research is done, how we come to understand the relationships between different parts of a whole, and I think a really fun project to do with students. I generally will introduce it to them with the concept of 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, which you may have heard of. There's a great website called the Oracle of Bacon that allows you to input any celebrity and it'll give you a sense of how closely connected, which gives students a sense of how closely connected Hollywood is. It's sort of a fun example to start them off with, and then we can talk about more complex and more important examples such as like neural networks or power grids to give them a better sense of that. And then I have them do a project where they map representations in a show of their choosing, right? Since we are in gender studies, our DH program, right? It's important for us to have a sense of how something like a network can show us about power. And so that's how I do that with my students. So this is a project I made to show a network to my students. I did it based on a video game series entitled Dragon Age, where I charted all of the individual characters, and the main characters are there popping up as I'm hovering over now, and all of the people they meet on their journeys. It shows the interconnections for each game and between games. You can see that we have these highlight functions. We also have them color coded based on grouping. So what fantasy race they're part of. I have a header up top. And so this just gives them a sense of what they can do with it and allows them to have a model to work off of as they're thinking about their own piece of media to analyze and think about representation and power in. Okay, so this is what Flourish looks like when you have your account. We can see that we have the ability to make new visualizations, and I have 2 projects listed. If I click onto my Dragon Age one, we can see what it looks like as you build it. We have the preview section and the data section where you input everything, the links and the points. We can see that I have those all charted with other information that I'll go into in a bit more depth as we go on. As we go back, I can show you my SpongeBob SquarePants one that I do in class to just give them a basic sense of how it works. It's a pretty easy show. Most of them have knowledge of it already, and so that's how I work with it. I'll make a new visualization just to show you what that looks like. We can see all the different options that Flourish has for data visualization, so you can check that out. We click network graph and it makes us a new one. The preset is Game of Thrones, so it is charting characters from the different houses and so on. When you start, you have that built in, so it gives you a sense of what it should look like. And when we click over to the data, we have these large data sets, and so you just have to delete everything, and then it'll give you a, empty sort of bit to work with. You can see that when I delete the links, it still leaves the points, but they're just no longer connected and they're just equidistant. So that's what it looks like in the preview, and it still has, all the other information. And then once we go to points, then we are, deleting those, and then we can have, like I said, a clean worksheet to work with. So we have a bunch of different bits of data to work with. So ID is obviously the name of the character. Group would be the groupings that we did, so the fantasy races, or it could be something related to gender, or whatever way that you want to categorize the people you're working with. We can make more columns in this spreadsheet, and then we can add in the information to have one be based on size, right? So that will determine how big the point is, right? So that, like in mine, I had the main character is bigger, and also an image so that we could give it an image if we wanted. You just make sure on the right hand side that you have it drawing from the right columns for size and for image. And then we are ready to start inputting some data about our media of choice. So if I were to do SpongeBob, I would start by listing all of the sort of most central characters that I want to think about their networks. So we have SpongeBob, Patrick, Sandy Cheeks, so on and so forth. This is case sensitive, and you want to make sure that you tell students that, because most of the times if the visualization is not working, it's because there's a typo somewhere. For grouping, I might do gender for SpongeBob, since they're not really humanoid characters with other, sorts of features. If I wanted to put an image, I would have to get a URL from online. And then for size, I could determine how big I want to make each of the circles. So SpongeBob would probably be the most primary. Patrick and some of the other characters would be smaller, depending on how important they are, right? So then this is asking them to think about sort of the centrality of particular characters. And we can see that when we go to preview, they are at varying sizes because I've coded them that way. The most important thing is for them to make a system and then stick with that system, so that it's meaningfully representing how they see the relationships working. Once you've built out the points, then you have to build out the links. And this is where we get tedious. And this is where that case sensitive stuff really matters. We can see that we are going to put in the source. So which character we've already defined as a point, SpongeBob. And then we're going to start putting the target. So now we can see that they're connected in our preview, right? When we go back and forth between data and preview. Value is the thickness of the link. And, you can adjust that as well. Because it's case sensitive, it's useful to use that little corner square where you can drag it down and it'll copy and paste SpongeBob, so we don't have to worry about case sensitive stuff. I'm just, copying and pasting the same bits from points because SpongeBob knows all of these characters. You can see that I put SpongeBob and Patrick and then Patrick and SpongeBob. That's important. You have to do it in sort of both directions to ensure that then Patrick will have his own sort of network, right? And so you have to think about this as like all the sort of permutations and combinations. And so we see that we have SpongeBob there in the center. Everyone is around him. But as we keep building more and more links, we're going to get more and more complexity, like we saw with the Dragon Age one that I built, right? And so, again, the case sensitive stuff can be really tedious. This isn't a difficult thing, right? It can be really tedious and difficult if we, do a network as big as the one that I showed. But for our students, they don't need to be quite as complicated, but we still want them to be getting at some complexity, right? And so now we can see that it's sort of building it out so that Patrick's there on the side. And as we keep on adding more and more complexity, it'll be more of in a regular shape rather than just radiating around one character. And then the same thing with the values that determines how thick the links are. They should have a system that's sort of determining how they're rating that. Another example is, do we want to have the thickness be on if they're good friends or not good friends? Do we want to have it be about intensity? So if they're very closely related but they have like a negative relationship, do we still count that as really intense or really thick, right? So it's asking them to sort of reason about how they understand the relationships between these characters and to give them more of a sense of how things are working, who sort of has the power and who doesn't within the context of the show. Again, this is maybe not the best example because we're thinking about humanoid little characters and we're not thinking about actual humans where we have these more complicated understandings of like race, gender, class, so on and so forth. And so we pretty much only have gender here, but we can see that it's taking on a more complex and interesting shape as we work on it. So again, not complicated, a bit tedious, but it's still asking them to reason in ways that I think are useful. And just to give you a bit more sense of what you can do to add more interest and complexity and everything to this, that's what it looks like when you click on the images and so on, right? You can see again how much data I put in order to get that level of complexity. And so this is quite a bit bigger than what my students would have made. But they had a sort of a middle ground that I think was still really valuable and useful. Yeah, so just sort of scrolling through so you can get a sense of quite how many entries we have. So about 878 links that I had to chart. A labor of love. And so this is what we can see. We also have this right hand area that has even more information. So we can like change sort of the theme. The midnight one, I have it set so that the background is white. So it's, not showing up exactly the way that it could, but it gives you a sense of how that looks. There are different things you can do with the points, changing the color, the sizes, really sort of customizing and adjusting it there. Links as well, I could change the color. They don't need to be black. I could make them red or some other color. The pop-ups that show up that give me a sense of what each point is. So if I disable them, they no longer pop up with the little image. If I re-enable them, it pops up again with the image from each game. We have a legend, so that's the groupings up there. You can add more complexity to that. You can add your footer. I put the sources that I used, the header. You can adjust that as well. Some accessibility information for a screen reader. And so, all of that adds extra complexity to their work. With the network analysis stuff, right, what we're trying to get them to understand is how power's working when we're thinking about representation. That's because of how our class is framed and because of how we're housed in women's and gender studies. You could have them doing networks that are having them understand the impact of their social networks. So, sort of charting their connections in some way. You could have one that's having them think about the relationships between different corporations. You could have something that's thinking about characters in a novel that you've all read together, so that it's not necessarily separate stories. You could have them doing projects that are considering the relationships between politicians, whether modern or in the past. And so I think that there's just a lot of different ways that you can go through this, right? To build out this map and to do this type of analysis. And I think that it is one that teaches them how to work with a data set, build out a data set. Again, it can be a little bit tedious, but as long as you are helping to oversee and give them a sense of how to work with the data, sort of where they're sourcing things, how they build it out, I think it's a really valuable and fun project that they seemed to enjoy. I always have my students do reflections alongside the actual project itself, and so that gives them time and space to make sure that they are articulating why they made the decisions that they make. So it sort of functions as almost like an artist statement around their critical thinking, and so that's one way that I help modulate it, so it's not like they're just making what is prettiest, but also making something that is as clear as possible and as effectively representative of what they see about the show that they're working on or the piece of media that they're thinking about, right? So that's how I do my network analysis projects, and I think it's pretty fun. If you want to try it, or there might be some other application I'm not thinking of, I really encourage you to play around with either the network analysis bits in Flourish or any of the other data visualizations that are really beautiful. Again, there are like bigger softwares, like bigger tools, something like Tableau that can do data visualization as well. But for this being open source and browser based, I think it's a really powerful and useful tool to have them be thinking about this sort of data visualization. So I encourage you to check it out. The next thing that I'm going to talk about is a mapping project I do with my students. Again, this is really useful for thinking about the relationship between space and power. And instead of using software like ArcGIS, which is sort of like industry standard, I feel like if we use something like Google My Maps, we are giving them a lot of the same bits of understanding. We're working with KML files, we're working with data sets, we're working with plotting points and all of the layers and all these sorts of things. But we're doing it in again, open source browser based tool that is giving them background on it while also making it a little bit more accessible for them, because ArcGIS is notoriously really difficult to learn, right? And so, like I said, I use Google My Maps, and I really love this project for having them think about things like sourcing their data, building out a project. So, I asked them, what is it that you want to learn? What types of information is necessary to answer the question that you're trying to answer, or to learn what you need to learn? What would be the best, most appropriate and correct sources that you could use? What is the most effective way that we want to represent the data? And then what have they learned once they've plotted all the points and, mapped all of the data, to give them a better understanding of how power is distributed, how people are relating, how things like wealth impact access to healthy food, or anything else, right, that you can think of. And so I think that this project is really useful as a tool to show them all that. And so this is what it looks like when you log into Google My Maps. Remember, it's Google My Maps and not Google Maps. That's different. You can see that we can create a new map, and we have two maps that I've already built to show you. This one is about mapping higher education in Jersey. So we can see that I have a wide variety of points plotted. It's a pretty simple interface. There are layers that you work on. So you create a layer with a subtype that you want to look at. Here I have also the ability to choose what the base map looks like, so that can add more contrast or more visual interest based on what we need with our map. So I'll just choose that one. And like I said, I've plotted all these points on a specific layer that's about New Jersey colleges and universities. I did community colleges. We search on the side. We can either just type something general like New Jersey colleges, and it'll give us some options, or you can look for a specific point. So I'll look up Rutgers, New Brunswick, where I did my PhD. I'll add that to the map very quickly. I could style individual points by clicking on here, but we'll do some of that later. We have the ability to rename, and usually there's a little description area. We can change and add a description there. We can also add an image to add visual interest. You can either upload something or search on Google Images. So I'll just search for Rutgers really quickly and then click a image that I think would be useful to use. So once I choose, I select that and I click save, and it'll load that in there, right? I'll do that again for another school. We'll do New Jersey City University. I will click add to map. And again, I'll add a picture based on Google Images. And so a really quick and easy way to plot these points, right? Like I said, you can either work with a general search. So I could look for health food stores in a given area, public schools, whatever, or I can search point by point for specific areas of interest that I know I want to do, or I want to think about. And so again, when we zoom out, we can see all of these different points. But this is just telling us where schools are located. That's not really giving us much complicated data to work with, right? And so we also want to make sure that we have things being organized in a way that makes sense. And so, like I said, I have, in addition to just colleges, I also have like for-profit institutions listed to give us a sense of where they are. But if I'm just looking at that map, they all look the same. So we're going to click this little roller here where it says individual styles, and we're going to put uniform style. And so now they will all look the same, and I can click out of that and click the paint bucket, and I can adjust what it is that I want this point to look like, the color, the icon, right? So for, just regular New Jersey colleges and universities, I'll have the little book. I'll do the same thing below for for-profit institutions. And now I have a better sense of where are the for-profit institutions located, where are New Jersey institutions located across the state. Then if we click the little hamburger on the side, layer options, we can click open data table, and that gives us a sense of all of the data that will pop up on a given point. We can insert a column and then put what we want it to be. So we'll add a description area, keep it as text. And then when we go down there, we can either input it in the data set itself or update that specifically on the point, which can give students a chance to give more context and information, history around a particular point, depending on what we're using it for. So then we can click out of that. And then if we go back to that data table, we can add another one. You also have the ability to add a column or an area that is going to be a number. So we'll put tuition, put number. You have to make sure you do that. And then that will make us a field where we can start inputting tuition amounts for each of the universities, right? So now I pulled up US News's website so that we can have the tuition information there. You can see that with the data sets, we can sort it so that it's in alphabetical order, which can make it easier to input data. And so now I'll just start adding the information that is listed for the for the tuition for each of these universities. Again, not a super difficult thing. I would say the most difficult part of this is making sure that they're sourcing their data from like a reliable source. Since US News is known for doing these sorts of ratings and rankings of universities, that's why I chose this. And so I would talk about that with them as I show this to them and have them make sure that they're making these same sorts of distinctions and conversations in their analysis that they're doing on the side. But we're just putting in that information. You don't need to put any commas, periods, anything like that, any dollar signs. You just leave it as a number, and it's important to do that so that you can make sure that it'll start generating and sorting it based on the data that we input in the next sorts of steps. And so, I'm showing this a little bit one by one, but, I think I'm just going to do a couple more, and then you will start seeing what we can do with that. And so we'll get a couple more, and then yes, I think we'll start building out the next spot. So once we've input that data, we can do a similar thing with the points, right? If we wanted to give more information about the tuition rates, we can choose that little paintbrush when we put sort or group data by tuition. We can even change the amounts of ranges that we have, the colors of them. So then when we look on the right hand side, we can see that the points will be gradated based on how expensive the tuition is, so that it's giving us a sense of where the most expensive universities in New Jersey are, which can give them a better understanding of sort of who has access to the best education. What are the areas that are considered hotspots for that? So now we've had points plotted. We've given information about the points by having that gradation of price. But how do we talk about the space around it? Well, we use what's called a KML file. It's basically a file that helps create these bounded geographic points that represent data. So it could be, in this case, we have the counties of New Jersey. It could be the cities, states, zip codes, right? There's plenty of these available for free online that students can access that. You add them by just creating a new layer, and then it'll have the ability to import that. And so we have this already imported for our students. In the same way that we could do the individual styles like before, we can also open up the data tables like we did before, and we want to add a new column that's maybe going to be something like median household income. And we'll make sure that says number. We can get rid of some extra data, which is the URL, which just leads to more information about these individual counties. And then we could start inputting data. Right now, I'm just putting random numbers, but I will show you what it looks like once you have real data put in. And, I'm just cleaning up some of this table here, deleting some of that stuff. So we're just left with the names and the median household incomes, whatever other data you want to put in. Like I said, you could add much more. You could add historical data with a description about it, anything you want. And then we do again, sorting that or grouping that by median household income. We have these ranges, and we can see even with just that little bit of data that I've put in, we can see the gradation of these lighter colors for less income and then darker colors for a higher income. And so again, that helps us make the connections between what are the wealthier areas, how is wealth distributed, and how does that impact maybe access to higher education. So that's how you add the information, and now I'll show you what it looks like done. And so students can make maps that look like this pretty easily, right? This is what it looks like when I've added in actual information from census data about median household incomes based on each county. And then you have conversations around, well, what do we glean from this? What is this map telling us? What do we know about these areas? And the more information that they add, the more complexity that they have. So one thing I was encouraging students to do, for example, is they could have made charts or data visualizations that show racial demographics in each county, so that then we can have a sense of, well, what is the racial makeup of counties that have a higher median income versus a lower median income, and then sort of understand what that might tell us about power, so on and so forth. There's so many different ways that you can think about this. I've had students do a lot of projects based on education, about entrepreneurship or business ownership, unemployment rates. I had one student that was thinking about like what kinds of programs do the top universities around the country have. So there's a lot of different ways that they can go with this. And similar to what we were doing with the network analysis, right? It's giving us this chance to build out the complexity by adding more and more information, more and more layers, more and more understanding for the students to then make statements about these larger questions. And so, yeah, I really thought this was a super fun project. I think my students really connected with it and liked it. And so I hope you'll find a way to use something like this in the context of your class too.
I'm Caroline Wilkinson, and we're going to be talking about debates in DH. One thing that we've been thinking about is alt data recovery and presentation. And what that means is when you have a website, such as a government website, where data has been deleted, or if you go onto a traditional search engine and you have trouble finding a source that you used to find easily, it's about how do we recover this data and also these primary sources so that they are available to people. Artificial intelligence, AI, is another discussion, and that has been coming up quite a lot for a variety of people, especially in education. We will talk more about AI in an upcoming slide, so we'll discuss it more then. Whose lives and experiences are included in DH projects? We again will talk about that in an upcoming slide. But what we're thinking about here is who has been traditionally excluded from DH and how can they become more a part of the DH conversation, but also DH projects too. Then, methodologies of data analysis. That is also going to be an upcoming slide. But when we're thinking about data analysis, it's about how is it broken down, but then also how can it be presented in a way where it does not create some kind of misinformation, etc. And then finally, access to DH. DH is something that for most people you hear from at the university or high school level. But it's about how do we make this more publicly available? You usually need a computer, phone, etc. to even access DH projects. You need Wi Fi. So it's about realizing what is needed for people to access DH, but then also how can we create software that is free so that more people can contribute to DH in a way that's more equitable. One aspect that we're going to talk about is whose lives are included in DH projects, but also in the discussions in digital humanities. So, DH provides a lens to analyze archives to see whose lives and experiences have been included and which ones have been excluded. And then when we understand which ones have been excluded, there can be projects that concentrate on those who've been ignored or marginalized more so that their voices are heard. And this is important not only because they are sharing their voices, but also because other people can find these archives through the internet and be able to connect with them. So, one is the LGBTQ Hudson County Oral History Archive, and we're going to look more closely at that upcoming. And another is the Chicana activism in the Southern Plains through time and space, which you have the link to here. The Hudson County LGBTQ Oral History Archive was created by our own Dr. Jennifer Musial, along with her Community Engaged Learning class. And it provides more insight into the LGBTQ community in Hudson County. You can go to Browse Narrators here and learn more about people's stories and also check out the other tabs as well. As artificial intelligence has become more of a part of our society and lives, then it's definitely important for digital humanities to understand the uses of AI and also what the limitations of it can be, as well as the benefits. So, one thing that is very important to be thinking about with AI is that it's more difficult to recognize what is real and what is AI. And that has happened to a lot of people, even just with photos that they've seen or videos. And those can lead to misinformation and to not really understanding. So it's important to reflect on when AI is helpful and for why, but not becoming too dependent on it. Because if you become too dependent, then you might not be doing as much critical thinking as is needed. And also, you might not be developing strategies and skills for yourself. And then it's important to also think about the ways that it can connect with humanity. So there are definitely ways that AI connects with humanity that we've already seen, but it's also important to demonstrate the limitations and make sure that we are balancing our understanding of AI with the critiques of it. We're also going to talk about methodologies of data analysis. So DH creates tools for data analysis and visualization that can demonstrate complexity in a more relatable way to the public so that data can be more understood. DH also works to make sure to understand how this data was used, what kind of data was used, what subset did it come from, how credible is the data, and what visuals would work best for certain audiences or certain purposes. So, some examples of projects like this are teaching with data, which we are going to look at more specifically in a moment. And then the next one on the origin of species, the preservation of favored traces, which is linked here. Teaching with data is a great resource that helps instructors understand how to integrate data analysis and visualization into their courses. It was created by one of our faculty fellows, Dr. Scott Fisher. And if you go down, you can see that there are different chapters to actually doing the work. It uses Tableau, so that's something to consider. But it's a very helpful resource for getting more familiar with how to integrate data in a way for students to understand. We wanted to give you some resources if you are interested in DH. One is the Digital Humanities Library Guide at NJCU that was created by Dr. Valentine. And it is an incredibly helpful resource at getting more of an introduction to DH and also looking at different methods and texts that are important. So I will be talking about that one more upcoming. Then the reading list for faculty. This is what we use with our faculty fellows. And it is a Google Classroom that has organized and curated readings for the digital humanities. And then finally, Digital Humanities Quarterly. This is an open access peer reviewed journal on articles and editorials in DH, and you can see what's significant in the field right now. I'm talking about the Digital Humanities Library Guide that is at the NJCU website. And one thing that is super helpful about this library guide is it gives you an understanding of what digital humanities means. And then it goes through different resources on digital humanities that you could show students if you would like. So there's one video here, but then also there are introductory readings. And these readings give an idea of what DH means and how it might be different from what we usually think about in terms of the humanities and the way that it connects so much with other disciplines. And so here are some books as well that you can check out if you're interested. These are all available at the NJCU library, and we would be happy to work with you if you would like to get any of them. Next is methods or tools for DH projects. And so these are broken down. We've already talked about a few of these in this video, but you can check out the different methods here. And then there are resources. We just want to thank you all for listening and watching today. And if you have any questions about digital humanities, you can reach out to us to our emails. And thank you so much again. Bye.